All right, just wanted to put out a medium length, middleweight mini lesson, particularly to review the homework from last week, homeworks numbers 9 and 10. Just wanted to kind of go over them, debrief you on how they might be applied to the letter, and in particular to talk about homework number 9, which was so disastrously bad in terms of number of people who actually achieved the assignment. Clearly that was my fault. So whatever you sent in, if you sent in a homework number 9, maybe you just summarized the article, maybe you created a first-person narrative on the basis of the article's fake perspective, or, and this is one layer too complicated, if you successfully steel-manned the perspective of the person watching the article, great. Any of those would get you points. I graded homework 9 very gently. If you handed something in that wasn't in German, you got full credit for it. But I wanted to review that so you had a second chance to see what I mean by steel manning, which you can use as a persuasive tactic in a letter to the editor. So here we go, one more look at straw manning and how you could use it as a persuasive tactic. You do not have to know the term straw manning, but think of straw manning as the opposite. That's kind of an older term that was around since like the 1950s for when you're going to be on a debate team. Straw manning is kind of a weaker version of a similar tactic. So let me make a distinction between straw manning and steel manning, knowing that steel manning is the only one you have to know for the quiz. But if you remember what a straw man argument is, maybe it makes it a little easier to remember what I'm going for with steel manning. So here's straw manning. Okay, let me give you an example. If you were going to straw man in your homework, you read the article that had to do with Trump and the entire Trump family getting indicted, getting arrested, being brought up on legal charges. This would be an example of a straw man argument. If somebody was kind of making that case, you'd say something like, well, of course, if you're a MAGA hat wearing conservative gun nut racist, of course you'd think that. In other words, you're basically just insulting the person or the stereotype of the person's point of view. So the reason that's a straw man argument is because it's weak. It's basically the laziest version of an argument where you just attack the type of person. Similarly, if you did the same thing for the AOC article about banning motorcycles, you might say in a straw man argument, of course you'd think that if you're just an entitled spineless libtard snowflake. So again, weakest version of the argument, where you're just attacking the personality or the stereotype. You have made no reference to the actual content of the argument. Steel manning, on the other hand, would be trying to deliberately and accurately represent the other point of view, but in a neutral or generous way. So you're actually trying to get inside the other person's perspective, see it from their point of view, so that when you do deconstruct their argument, you're deconstructing the right points. You're actually going to be more incisive if you've shown that you can get inside the other person's head and start defeating their argument from within. So ideally, what I was looking for in the homework, let's say you read the Trump indictment article. Again, that didn't really happen. That was fake news. But if you're trying to get inside the head of somebody who might believe that, typically it would be a liberal, left-leaning Democrat who would see an article about Trump and his family getting arrested and say, ah, good, finally. If you're really steel manning, if you're genuinely steel manning that argument, you might say something like, well, it sounds like you value the rule of law. You think it's important that if somebody commits a crime, no matter how high or low they are on the socioeconomic spectrum, that they should be held accountable. So it sounds like you value the rule of law and you think the law should be applied fairly and evenly, no matter whether or not that person is high in a position of power, authority, or wealth. So you're really trying to kind of create a good faith version of their argument. I can see this from your perspective. I'm trying to really understand why you believe what you believe, and you're not resorting to the generalizations, the stereotypes, insulting the person's character. You're trying to show that you understand the argument first. So then, if you were to try to deconstruct that argument, you're deconstructing an honest version of their argument and not just launching insults. Similarly, if you read the AOC article, somebody who that might make angry, who might fall for that, is going to be typically more conservative. They're going to be right-leaning. And same thing, you're not going to try to attack them directly. You're going to try to accurately articulate why you think they believe what they believe, or actual points that might be points of common ground. So we know that if you hate AOC, you're going to likely be for personal liberties, personal rights, You might already be anxious that she's coming after the Second Amendment, so you might say something like, so it sounds like you value personal liberty, and motorcycles, what could be a more symbolic expression of being free or having personal liberty. So I could certainly understand why somebody who's already worried about the liberals coming for the guns might also worry that this could be true, that maybe AOC is in fact coming for your motorcycles. Again, you're trying to be neutral, you're trying to genuinely and generously get inside that person's perspective. If you can do that in a letter, just like a little short paragraph or a few sentences of expressing the other side's point of view, when you get to your own point of view, it should be a little more incisive and a little bit more persuasive because you've shown you're actually smart enough to understand the argument that you're deconstructing. So I'm going to try to take that was homework number 9, and connect it to homework number 10. This is the homework where you had to read about witchcraft in Africa, problem that's been around for a long time, and it seems like it's been getting worse in the last 10 years, and basically try to demonstrate how you could use lateral issues, one of the vocab terms, to come at the topic in an original way, or so you have your own original spin on whatever topic you decide you want to talk about. So I'm basically going to pretend you read that article called Cast as Witches, Then Cast Out, and imagine that you're writing your essay on that topic, and I'll try to talk you through how you might approach that topic. The reason the homework involved the investigative journalist style questions is that's a good way to start looking for lateral issues, and most of you nailed that one, by the way. Like 80 or 90% of you did a really good job with homework number 10. So that's 9 out of 10. That's not too bad. I only miffed one set of directions so far. That's a decent track record. The Witches homework was designed to get you thinking about different inroads to the topic. So I picked some of the best questions that you asked. A lot of you kind of approached it in a second person investigative journalism style, like they addressed the government officials directly. Why would you do this or that? Or how could you let these laws be passed? That's totally fine. If you make them a little bit more open-ended or objective, that can be good too. So here were some common questions. All these count as like good ways into a lateral issue that you could use to focus your letter. A lot of you asked some version of what's the government doing to solve the problem? And if you watch the Truth Loader video, you realize that the government is actually part of the problem. So it's not just small towns or in kind of rural sections of, I think Swaziland was the main example they used in the Truth Loader video. It actually is top down as well as bottom up. So government officials, some of the heads of state believe in witchcraft, understand it as a problem, and have actually passed laws like you can only fly your broomstick 150 meters in the air. So in other words, it's accepted not just that this is a problem, but the witchcraft in particular is what needs to be legislated against. So that would be a good inroad. What is the government doing? What's the government's role in this problem? Are they trying to help, or are they making it worse? That would give you one point of focus. A lot of you asked about the medical infrastructure. Totally reasonable to wonder if somebody is accused of being witchcraft because a family member dies. They might have had a heart attack, but if there's no doctors around to assess or diagnose it as a heart attack, then you're going to go to the next less logical conclusion, which was that it was a family member casting spells. So a lot of you knew that that would be an open question. You could use that as a point of focus for your letter. Is this a rural problem or is it national? I already said that it is actually top down for a lot of these countries. But if you found out it only happened in rural parts of town, but not in the cities, that could give you a specific point of focus. A lot of you were very clever in figuring out there's typically two types of people that get accused of being witches. And not coincidentally, those two groups are children and the elderly female population. What do they have in common? Vulnerability. So you rarely see the 22-year-old strapping fit males getting accused of being witches. That sounds important to me. That sounds like it might be more about scapegoating and less about actual witchcraft, because if they're only picking on people who are less likely to defend themselves, that seems suspicious to me. And of course, I'm me, this is what I do for a living, so I'd be interested in what's the education like? Is there an educational infrastructure? Are there problems or holes with that? So if I was writing this letter, maybe I'd pick education as my lateral issue, make that my main focus, and kind of build my paper around that. So the idea is any one of these could get you a lateral issue that is implied but not stated directly in the article itself. Once you have that point of focus, you might be able to keep the letter a little more lean. You're not as likely to make broad generalizations. You're going to be more nuanced in your discussion, and it shows that you're informed enough to try to dig into that topic. Quite a few of you were eagle-eyed enough to very closely read that initial article from the New York Times, and you clued into one specific sentence. If we were doing this in class, I would have given you the exercise of, can you find one sentence in the entire article that kind of puts a different spin on everything else in the article? For my money, I'd say this is the most important lateral issue. It is implied but not stated directly, except maybe for this one half of a sentence, which goes, child advocates estimate that thousands of children living in the streets of Kinshasa, Congo's capital, have been accused of witchcraft and cast out by their families. I don't know if you can see it, but this should be in neon lettering. This should have leapt out at you, often as a rationale for not having to feed or care for them. What that tells me is this is much more about the economic situation than it is anything else. So what do education and the medical infrastructure and corrupt governments all have in common? They all tend to be worse or of lower quality in countries where the underlying economics are not very strong. So if you're thinking about this in reference to the letter to the editor, you could say, all right, here's an article, my gut reaction. The first part of the homework could be part of your intro, where you're just expressing your opinion on the situation, your kind of initial emotional response, positive or negative. Then you move on to some examples. You might use a lateral issue to create a main point of focus. So I'd like to talk about education because that's what I do. Maybe you're going into the nursing program, so you're going to focus more on the medical infrastructure. And I think in this particular situation, the problem underneath all of those other problems, the essential first cause, is probably poverty. It is the economic situation that is the catalyst that creates all of the other problems. They all kind of grow out of it. So I think the most intelligent letter might talk through a lot of those issues, but ultimately try to look for a root cause. So let me make one final thought. This last part of the interview falls more under the category of personal opinion or personal grudges, but I do want to try to tie this homework, the witchcraft homework, to the GCP Gray video called This Will Make You Angry. This video will make you angry, because quite a few of you got every question right except the symbiotic question. So the premise of that video was, if there's two sides of an argument, each side not only is ginned up by creating the cartoon enemy on the other side, there's a symbiotic relationship, which means they need each other. And that's a tough pill for some of you to swallow. So let me, again, this is personal opinion, but I want to make a case for maybe what's wrong with arguments in America and possibly the foundational problem with all of American politics today. I'll make a pretty big claim about that. So you can agree or disagree with that, but it is one way you can think about how the letter to the editor uses an intelligent opinion to try to cut through some of the dumber arguments that are out there, the more abstract generalization or insult-based arguments that are the touchstone of internet arguments in all of politics in America today. So back to the hypothetical, I had you in the discussion imagine that you're part of a legislative body and you came up with some really thoughtful, intelligent answers to the question of how high in the air should a witch be allowed to fly, and you used some pretty logical reasoning and you came up with some good analysis. And not many of you succumb to the knee-jerk reaction of, well, that's a dumb question. Shouldn't we be asking whether or not witches flying is a problem in the first place before we spend valuable taxpayer dollars deciding how to solve a problem that doesn't even exist? I think that's a really important moment because, again, I'm going to make the case that might be everything that's wrong with American politics today. In your head, imagine a kind of cliche version of both sides. I want you to imagine a cartoon version of a liberal, left-leaning, vegetarian, Birkenstock wearing, coexist sticker on the back of their battery-powered vehicle. Again, just deliberately a stereotypical cliche version. Do the same thing for a red MAGA hat wearing Republican, conservative, don't tread on me, Mossy Oaks sticker on the back of their pickup truck. Again, just a simplified, deliberately stereotypical versions of those two sides. So the kind of cliche liberal Democrat and the cliche liberal Republican. And I want you to think, how might they respond to that question of witchcraft as a problem, as it's described in the newspaper article? What would a cliche liberal perhaps say about that? What would a cliche Republican? I might argue that your cliche your cliche Republican, right, the right-wing pickup truck, mossy oaks, would say something like this in reference to the problem of witchcraft, which problem is getting out of control in America. They're not like us. They're pure evil. They're spilling into our country across our borders. So the correct answer of how high a witch should be allowed to fly is the exact height of the wall to keep them out. They're threatening our American way of life and corrupting our youth. Think about that, first of all, as, again, deliberately stereotypical, but it is protectionist, it is conservative. We've got an emphasis on family values and trying to maintain a certain cultural status quo. So maybe this is what a cartoon version of a right-wing Republican might say in response to this problem. Now try to imagine the opposing, the butterflies and flowers. The opposing side would be, again, the vegetarian, granola eating liberal with the coexist sticker on the battery powered car. They might suggest something more along these lines. Witches, actually, we're not supposed to say witches anymore. The culturally sensitive term is supernatural Americans, so you get that right. Deserve respect. They need to have their civil rights protected at all costs. And if you criticize a supernatural American or use deeply culturally insensitive language like witch hunt, or the incredibly offensive term for Middle Eastern witches called sandwiches, then you're part of the problem. We're going to get canceled. Get woke, sheeple. Again, deliberately a stereotype, deliberately trying to just imagine a cartoon version of that perspective. What I'm doing right now is sort of straw manning, right? I'm reducing it to its simplest forms. But my question for you, let's say laws were actually being passed about witchcraft in America, and the Republicans are clearly going to argue in one voice with one narrative. The liberals are going to argue with a different voice and a different set of narratives. And my ultimate question to you is, how much do either of these perspectives help the problem of poverty? I hope it's obvious that zero. They have this many things to say about poverty or the medical infrastructure or government corruption. In other words, it's an argument between both sides, and you can imagine a Republican and a Democrat having that argument pretty much forever. Each side feels extremely emotional about their side. They're positive that they're right, and neither side is going to actually touch the problem. Neither side is going to be able to extrapolate a solution to the problem based on the stance that they're taking. In other words, it's butterflies and flowers again. Two sides in an argument, both feel very strongly. The internet just juices up and inflates those arguments until you've got two sides, positive they're right, arguing about something that maybe has nothing to do with the actual problem at hand. That's my case for what might be wrong with all of politics in America for the last 40 years. So I just want to end by leaving you with one final thought, hopefully one encouraging final thought about your letter to the editor essay. Believe me when I tell you, and you have to know that I'm being serious, if you write a letter to the editor that I strongly disagree with, if you happen to be on the exact opposite of my political beliefs on a certain specific issue, I love giving those papers A's. Does that make sense? Do you believe me when I tell you that I actually feel good when I'm able to give an A to a paper that I disagree with, because that proves it's raising the level of the discourse. It's raising the level of the argument. So whatever you want to choose, it doesn't have to be political, could be sports related, could be celebrity gossip, does not matter what your topic is, but if you happen to write something that I disagree with, but it is nuanced, you're able to step out of the abstraction loop that I would argue Republicans and Democrats are impenetrably stuck in, that means I win, right? If I'm able to get you out into the world after this class arguing your opinion that I disagree with more nuance, more logic, and you stepped out of the dumbest abstraction loops, I win. And I would go as far as to say, the more of you that I disagree with that are able to have those arguments more intelligently with more nuance and more concrete examples might be the future of democracy. I don't want to overload the essay with too much significance, but your ability to argue your opinion with nuance and intelligence might be the only thing that keeps America from completely succumbing to the termite infestation eating the foundation at the way that we have political discussions. So make sure you're sending me any questions about the letter. I've already gotten 2 or 3 full drafts. They look great. Typically the people who would send in drafts this early are going to do great on the essay anyway. It's the shortest essay of the semester, so keep in mind, point for point, there is more points for each sentence. Each square inch of text is worth a little bit more. So take your time, be patient, send me any work that you want to get some advance notice on. We'll see you next time.